Ladies and gentlemen, when God begins a work in your life, you will never be the same. No matter where you are in your spiritual journey, no matter what challenges you are facing, once you encounter the presence and power of God, transformation begins. You may not see it immediately, but if you trust Him, if you surrender to His will, you will find that your life will take a course you never imagined. Because when God calls you, when He places His hand upon you, He does not leave you as you are. He molds, refines, and prepares you for a greater purpose than you could ever envision. Life has a way of changing us. Every experience, every trial, every blessing shapes who we are. Some of those experiences lift us, while others wound us deeply. We go through moments of joy and seasons of sorrow. We face victories that make us feel strong, and we endure defeats that humble us to our core. But there is one thing that remains true through it all: God is working. He is working in your heart, in your circumstances, in your struggles, and in your victories. He is shaping you into the person He created you to be. Perhaps you feel stuck. Maybe you've been carrying burdens that seem too heavy to bear. You've prayed, but the answers haven't come. You've waited, but the breakthrough hasn't arrived. You've sought God, but at times He has seemed silent. In those moments, you may wonder if anything is changing at all. But let me tell you, God is never idle. His silence does not mean inactivity. His delay does not mean denial. He is working behind the scenes, doing a work in you that will change you forever. Some of the greatest transformations happen in the quiet, unseen places of our hearts. The way you think, the way you respond, the way you trust God is refining these areas of your life. When you surrender to His process, you begin to see His hand moving. It may be slow, but it is sure. It may be painful, but it is necessary. God is not interested in making temporary changes in your life. He is in the business of eternal transformation. One of the greatest examples of transformation in the Bible is the life of the Apostle Paul. He was a man who once persecuted Christians with a passion, a man who was convinced that he was doing the right thing by standing against the followers of Jesus. But one encounter with the risen Christ changed everything. In a moment, Paul's life took a turn he never expected. He went from being a persecutor to a preacher, from an enemy of the gospel to its greatest advocate. Did that transformation happen instantly? It began with an encounter, but the process of becoming who God called him to be took time. It required surrender. It required suffering. It required trust. And the same is true for you. You may not have had a dramatic moment like Paul, but I assure you, God has called you for a purpose. He has placed something in you that the world needs, and if you allow Him to shape you, to refine you, to teach you, you will see that you will never be the same. Some people resist change because they fear what it might bring. They cling to the familiar, even if it's painful, because at least it is known. But let me tell you, when God changes you, it is always for the better. You may not understand it at first, but His ways are always higher than our way. He sees the full picture while we see only a small piece. That is why faith is essential. Faith says, God, I don't understand, but I trust you. Faith says, Lord, this is difficult, but I know you are working. Faith says, I may not see the change yet, but I believe you are transforming me. And when you trust God in that way, you will see that every trial has a purpose. Every struggle has a lesson. Every season of waiting is not wasted. Time is preparation for what is to come. Maybe you are facing something today that feels overwhelming. Maybe the weight of your past is pressing down on you. Maybe you've been holding on to bitterness, regret, or fear. Let me remind you, you don't have to stay where you are. God is calling you to something greater. He is calling you to freedom, to joy, to peace. But you must be willing to let go. You must be willing to say, Lord, have your way in me. And when you do, when you open your heart fully to Him, transformation began. God doesn't just change circumstances. He changes people. He changes hearts. He renews minds. He restores souls. And when He touches your life, you will never be the same. When God begins a work in your life, He does not leave you the same. His transformation is not temporary but eternal, shaping your heart, mind, and character for His greater purpose. Even when change is slow or painful, trust that He is working behind the scenes to refine and strengthen you. True change happens when you fully trust God, even when you don't understand His plan. Surrendering your fears, struggles, and uncertainties to Him allows His power to work in you, leading to freedom, peace, and a life that reflects His glory. When God begins a work in your life, He does not leave you the same. His transformation is not temporary but eternal, shaping your heart, mind, and character for His greater purpose. Even when change is slow or painful, trust that He is working behind the scenes to refine and strengthen you. One of the most powerful truths in the Christian life is that God is constantly at work within us. From the moment we surrender to Him, He begins a process of transformation that continues for the rest of our lives. No one who truly encounters God remains the same. He changes our desires, our thoughts, our habits, and our entire perspective on life. What once seemed important begins to fade in comparison to the purpose He has placed before us. The things we once held on to so tightly no longer satisfy in the same way because God is drawing us into something greater. But this process of transformation is not always easy. It often requires breaking before rebuilding, pruning before growth, and surrender before blessing. God does not simply want to improve certain areas of our lives. He wants to completely renew us. He does not offer temporary fixes or surface-level adjustments. He works from the inside out, shaping us into the image of His Son. This means that sometimes He will allow us to go through trials, challenges, and difficult seasons to refine us and make us more like Christ. Think about how gold is purified. It must go through intense heat to remove all the impurities. The fire does not destroy it. It makes it purer, stronger, and more valuable. The same is true for us. When God allows us to go through the fire of trials, it is not to harm us, but to refine us. He is removing what does not belong so that we can become more like Him. The struggles you face today are not meaningless. They are shaping you, strengthening you, and preparing you for what is to come. One of the greatest examples of transformation in the Bible is the life of the Apostle Peter. When we first meet Peter in the Gospels, he is impulsive, outspoken, and often acts before thinking. He boldly declares his loyalty to Jesus. Yet when the moment of testing comes, he denies knowing Him 3 times. But Jesus did not give up on Peter. He saw beyond his failures and weaknesses. He knew that Peter's story was not over. After His resurrection, Jesus restored Peter, gave him a new purpose, and filled him with the Holy Spirit. The same man who once denied Jesus out of fear became one of the boldest preachers of the gospel. He was transformed not because of his own strength, but because of what God had done in him. God sees beyond where you are right now. He knows your struggles, your weaknesses, and your fears, but He also knows the person He is shaping you to become. He does not call you based on who you are today. He calls you based on who He is making you to be. You may feel unqualified, broken, or stuck in your past, but when God's hand is on your life, you will never be the same. Sometimes we resist change because we fear the unknown. We become comfortable in our routines, even if they are not leading us to where God wants us to be. We hold on to old habits, old mindsets, and even old wounds because letting go feels uncertain. But God never calls us to stay the same. He is always calling us to grow, to trust Him more, to step into new levels of faith. The moment you say yes to God's plan, your life will begin to change in ways you never expected. Think about Moses. He was an ordinary man with a complicated past. He had made mistakes, he had run away from his problems, and he felt inadequate when God called him to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. But once he surrendered to God's plan, he was never the same. The fearful man who once hid in the wilderness became a bold leader who performed miracles, stood before Pharaoh, and led an entire nation to freedom. That transformation did not happen overnight, but through every step of obedience, Moses became the person God created him to be. The same is true for you. God is not finished with you yet. He is shaping you even in the moments when you don't feel it. He is working even when you cannot see it. You may feel like you are stuck in the middle of a process, wondering when the breakthrough will come. But every great transformation takes time. God is patient with you, and He is faithful to complete the work He has started in you. There may be seasons where you feel stretched, uncomfortable, or uncertain. You may wonder why certain doors have closed, why certain relationships have ended, or why certain prayers seem unanswered. But trust that God is positioning you for something greater. He sees what you cannot see. He knows what is ahead, and He is preparing you so that when you step into the next season, you will be ready. When God changes you, it is not just for your benefit, it's for His glory. The work He does in your life is meant to be a testimony to others. The struggles you overcome, the lessons you learn, and the transformation you experience will be used to encourage someone else. Your story is not just about you, it is part of a greater purpose. Joseph's life is a perfect example of this. He went through betrayal, slavery, false accusations, and years of imprisonment. It would have been easy for him to become bitter and question why God allowed such hardship, but God was using every experience to shape him into the man who would one day save an entire nation. When the time came, Joseph was no longer the same young boy who had been sold into slavery. He was a man of wisdom, faith, and integrity, ready to step into the destiny God had prepared for him. Your transformation may not always be visible to others, but it is happening. Every time you choose to trust God instead of giving in to fear, you are changing. Every time you choose faith over doubt, you are growing. Every time you surrender your plans to His will, you are becoming more like Christ. God does not waste anything. Every experience, every trial, and every moment of your journey is being used for His purpose. You may not understand it now, but one day you will look back and see His hand in every detail. The things that once seemed like setbacks will be revealed as stepping stones to something greater. The struggles that once felt overwhelming will be the very things that strengthened your faith. No matter where you are today, know that God is not finished with you. His transformation is ongoing, and it is always for your good. You may not feel different overnight, but every step of obedience brings you closer to the person He created you to be. Keep trusting, keep surrendering, and keep believing that the work He has started in you will be completed. True change happens when you fully trust God, even when you don't understand His plan. Surrendering your fears, struggles, and uncertainties to Him allows His power to work in you, leading to freedom, peace, and a life that reflects His glory. Faith is the foundation of our relationship with God. It is the key that unlocks His promises, the bridge that connects us to His power, and the lens through which we see His hand at work. But faith is not just about believing in God's existence. It is about trusting Him completely, even when the path ahead is unclear. True faith is not dependent on circumstances. It is rooted in the unshakable character of God. It says, even if I don't see the answer yet, I trust that God is working. It declares, even when I don't understand, I know His plans are good. Faith does not require us to have all the answers. It requires us to trust the one who does. One of the greatest challenges of faith is surrender. Many people say they trust God, but they still try to control their own lives. They hold on to their plans, their fears, their worries, and their past hurts, unwilling to fully release them into God's hands. But true faith requires letting go. It means surrendering not just parts of our lives, but everything: our dreams, our struggles, our relationships, and our future. It means saying, Lord, I trust You with all of it. Even if things don't go the way I expected, I believe You are in control. Abraham's life is a powerful example of faith and surrender. God called him to leave everything familiar: his home, his family, his country, go to a land that he would show him. Abraham had no map, no details, and no guarantees. All he had was a promise from God. And yet he obeyed. He stepped out in faith, trusting that God would lead him. And because of that faith, he became the father of many nations. His surrender led to a blessing far greater than he could have imagined. But Abraham's journey of faith did not stop there. Years later, after God had fulfilled his promise and given him a son, Isaac, Abraham faced another test. God asked him to sacrifice Isaac, the very son through whom the promise was to be fulfilled. Imagine the emotions Abraham must have felt: confusion, sorrow, and perhaps even fear. But instead of resisting, he obeyed. He trusted that God had a plan, even if he could not see it. And at the last moment, God provided a ram in Isaac's place, proving once again that he is always faithful. That is what true faith looks like. It is not just believing when things are easy. It is trusting when everything is uncertain. It is obeying even when it doesn't make sense. It is surrendering our will to God's, knowing that his ways are always higher than ours. Many people struggle with surrender because they fear losing control. But the truth is, we are never truly in control to begin with. We can make plans, set goals, and try to shape our own future, but ultimately God is the one who directs our steps. When we fight for control, we only create stress, worry, and frustration. But when we release everything into God's hands, we find peace. Surrender is not losing, is gaining. It is gaining freedom from fear, gaining rest from striving, and gaining confidence in God's perfect plan. Jesus himself demonstrated the ultimate act of surrender in the Garden of Gethsemane. As he faced the cross, he prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but yours be done." He knew the suffering that lay ahead, yet he chose to surrender to the Father's will. His trust in God's plan led to the greatest victory in history, the salvation of mankind. If Jesus, the Son of God, surrendered everything to the Father, how much more should we? Surrender is not just a one-time decision, it is a daily choice. Every day we must choose to lay down our worries, our fears, and our own desires at God's feet. We must choose to trust him with our finances, our health, our relationships, and our future. The enemy will always try to make us doubt, whispering lies that God is not in control, that he has forgotten us, or that we need to take matters into our own hands. But faith silences those lies. Faith says, God is in control and I trust him completely. One of the greatest benefits of surrender is peace. When we truly trust God, we no longer have to carry the burden of figuring everything out on our own. We don't have to stress over the future, because we know that God has already gone before us. We don't have to be anxious about what's next, because we trust that he is leading us in the right direction. The Bible says in Isaiah 26:3, "You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you." Peace is not found in having all the answers. It is found in trusting the one who does. Faith and surrender also open the door for God to work in miraculous ways. Throughout the Bible, we see that God moves powerfully in the lives of those who trust him completely. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them, they had no escape. But Moses trusted God, stretched out his staff, and the sea parted. When David faced Goliath, he did not rely on his own strength. He trusted in the power of God. And with a single stone, the giant fell. When Peter stepped out of the boat to walk on water, he was able to do the impossible as long as his eyes remained fixed on Jesus. Faith is what allows the impossible to become possible. Perhaps you are facing a situation today where you don't see a way forward. Maybe you have prayed for an answer, but nothing has changed. Maybe you feel like you are standing at the edge of the Red Sea with no clear path ahead. This is the moment when faith must rise. This is the moment to surrender your fear, your doubt, and your need for control, and trust that God is already making a way. God does not ask us to understand everything. He simply asks us to trust him. He asks us to walk by faith, not by sight. He asks us to believe that he is working even when we cannot see the evidence yet. The enemy will try to shake your faith, but stand firm. Hold on to his promises. Declare his faithfulness. Remind yourself of all the times he has been there before and trust that he will be there again. Faith and surrender are not just about receiving blessings, they are about becoming who God created us to be. When we fully trust him, we begin to live with boldness, confidence, and purpose. We are no longer bound by fear or controlled by circumstances. We walk in freedom, knowing that the same God who created the heavens and the earth is the one holding our lives in his hand. The journey of faith is not always easy, but it is always worth it. Every step of trust draws us closer to God. Every act of surrender deepens our relationship with him. And every moment of obedience leads to a life that reflects his glory. Keep trusting, keep surrendering, and know that God is always working for your good.